Good morning, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Maggie Connolly, and I am the planetarium specialist at Roper Mountain. Today, excuse me, today we are joined by a very special guest, Denise Hill, who works with NASA. She's been there for a little less than 2 years, and her title is very fancy. I'm going to read it. She is the Strategic Communications Specialist. I think she'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but also why we're talking to her today, because NASA has some really great events coming up on its horizon, and we just wanted to share them with you. Throughout the presentation, we will be answering questions. We might do them some during, some at the end, but if you have questions, please feel free to just toss them in the chat, and we'll get to them as we can. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Denise.
Thanks so much, Maggie. Okay, so I'm going to start my camera and share my presentation with you all. Okay, and so as Maggie said, my name is Denise Hill, and I'm a Strategic Communications Specialist at NASA, and that's just a long, fancy way of saying that I'm a writer, graphic designer. I do social media, anything written. I do reports, speeches, all kinds of things. A lot of our web articles, anything that has to do with communicating with the public. I appreciate you guys for inviting me here today. So as Maggie said, today I'm going to talk to you about our Artemis program and what all goes into getting humans on the moon by 2024. And then we'll also do a little discussion on STEM careers and what it takes to be in a profession at NASA. And then lastly, how NASA impacts your everyday life. So our Artemis program is, here's a quick little overview of what it is, but Artemis is the namesake of the mission to return humans to the moon by 2024. Artemis in Greek mythology is the twin sister of Apollo, and Apollo was were our first moon missions. Artemis personifies our goal of putting the first woman and the next man on the moon. And even though we're going back to the moon, we've already been there, this mission is special because we'll land our astronauts on the moon's south pole, which has never been done before. So we're going to the moon for many reasons. The moon, first and foremost, is a natural stepping stone for Mars. We're going to use new technologies, capabilities, business approaches to explore farther into the solar system, which includes going to Mars. On the lunar surface, we're going to look for water from ice and other natural resources. We're going to secure America's preeminence in space exploration and establish a strategic presence on the moon. By investing in the moon, we are investing in our future. This is going to create new jobs and help improve life here on Earth. So what will we do when we get there? So we're going to gain confidence in planetary human robotic exploration on the moon before taking our human missions to Mars. We're going to operate systems on the surface from lunar orbit. We're going to conduct science experiments. We're going to prospect and look for resources. We're going to return samples from the moon to Earth. And we're going to operate autonomously on another world with communication delays. And this is super important for our missions to Mars because the delay from the moon to Earth is pretty short. But the delay from communicating from Mars to Earth is right now at 24 minutes. So if something were to happen to an astronaut while they're there, they can't communicate with ground control to get assistance. So they have to be able to have everything that they need to be able to operate and function and take care of any situations that arise while they're on Mars. And then we're going to be able to establish deep space logistical supply chains. So to be able to move stuff from Earth to the moon or into orbit very quickly. So our mission needs drive the design. And so this kind of shows you the different needs. So when we're in low Earth orbit, which is like the International Space Station, and pretty much that's the only place we go right now in low Earth orbit. It only takes 3 hours to get there or to return. To go to the moon, it's a 3-day journey. When we go to Mars, it's 9 months to return back to Earth. So again, it's so important if something were to happen while we're on Mars, we can't just return the astronauts or get them back here quickly. Do we have any questions so far?
Looks like we're good so far. I have a question for you, though. So you had mentioned that this was the first mission to the moon that was going to have female astronauts. Do we know how many females yet? Have they picked out the team?
So that is a great question.
It's okay if you don't know. I just figured I would ask.
So we kind of have, but it's kind of, we like to do everything in announcements. So we have a big event planned. So we know for sure, there will be for sure one female astronaut in the crew, for absolutely certain. The rest of the crew, there could be more, but we know for sure there's one. And then we have a rollout probably, I want to say later this year, where we should be making that announcement. We will see that.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to go back. The next thing we were going to kind of talk about is our Space Launch System rocket, which we lovingly have dubbed SLS. There's no other rocket with the power and capability of SLS. It is the most powerful rocket on Earth. It's the only exploration class vehicle capable of sending humans to deep space. It has the power and capacity to lift large and complex payloads, which is important because it reduces the number of launches and trips we need to put hardware into space. SLS stands 322 feet tall, which if you've ever been to like the Statue of Liberty is around 312 feet tall, somewhere between 307 and 312 feet tall. And this is a full 17 feet taller than that. It weighs almost 6 million pounds and has 9 million pounds of thrust. And this next video kind of explains how SLS works, and we'll give you kind of an overview of how the launch sequence will work.
Hi, my name is Catherine Crow, and I'm a systems engineer right here at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And this is rocket science in 60 seconds. NASA's Space Launch System, also known as the SLS, is a powerful rocket that can carry the Orion spacecraft as well as crew and large payloads to the moon. The SLS rocket is powered by twin 5-segment solid rocket boosters in a core stage with 4 RS-25 engines. 2 massive tanks hold hundreds of thousands of gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen to provide propellant to the 4 engines. SLS is the only rocket that can move us forward to explore the moon, establish a permanent base there, and develop the technologies to take American astronauts to Mars and beyond.
So I hope you kind of understand, one of the things I really want to press here is that while we're going to the moon, and it's so exciting, it's not just going to be like a one-trick pony kind of thing. It's not going to be a one-time thing. We're going to continuously go. We're going to establish a base there. We just have so many plans. And so the systems that we're designing today are going to propel us to not only just go, but to also start setting up things so that we can go continuously and then go to Mars. The next piece of us getting back to the moon is the Orion spacecraft. And Orion is built to take humans farther than they've ever gone, and it will launch on top of the Space Launch System, or SLS. So it'll serve as the vehicle that will carry the crew to space. It provides emergency abort capabilities. It'll sustain the crew during space travel, and it provides safe re-entry from deep space return velocities. Orion is designed to accommodate about 99% of the human population, and it can accommodate astronauts between 4'10" and 6'5", which is pretty good. The crew module provides about 30% more cubic volume than the Apollo capsule. The Orion heat shield, which is a super important part of Orion, when Orion enters the Earth's atmosphere from a mission to the moon, its heat shield has to protect the vehicle and the crew from an external temperature of up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And the sun at its core is 10,000 degrees, just to kind of give you an idea of just how hot that is. This is currently where we are with Orion. It's at Kennedy Space Center. It's ready to undergo final testing and assembly. Then it'll be integrated into the SLS rocket. It's put on top and all the systems are synced and kind of linked together. And just to kind of give you an idea of what Orion has to be able to withstand with the crew inside of it, when it returns to Earth from the moon, it'll be returning at speeds of about 25,000 miles per hour. And at this speed, Orion could travel from Los Angeles to New York in 6 minutes. And that normally takes commercial airlines about 5.5 hours to do. And I'll pause there. Do we have any other questions?
Oh, yes, we have quite a few. If you have a few minutes.
Sure. Let me stop sharing really quick. And get back in. Shoot.
All right, so we'll start by talking about the Orion, since you were just talking about that. Allison's son wants to know how far the Orion will go.
That's a great question. So Orion will go all the way to orbit around the moon. So it goes all the way to the moon, and then it'll go all the way to the Mars orbit. So it doesn't actually land, and we'll kind of get to how it gets there, but it doesn't, it's hard to explain. It's like when we have a car, the car drives to the store, but it doesn't go in the store. You actually have to get out and you have to walk to the store. So that's kind of what this vehicle does. It gets you in orbit around the moon or in orbit around Mars, and then we have to have landers or something else to actually physically get onto the moon, onto the lunar surface or the Mars surface.
That was a great way to put it, I think, about like driving to the store and then having to walk into the store. That's fantastic. Right, we have a couple just kind of general space questions.
Sure.
So David's daughter would like to know if you have a favorite space food. And that made us wonder if some space foods were more popular than others.
So I haven't tried them all. They're evolving so much. And one of the coolest things, this is such a cool question. I could talk about this all day. But one of the greatest things about space food is I hear it's pretty delicious, but the thing that's off is the texture. So they can mimic tastes pretty well, but you also have to remember that their food is very different than the food we eat. It has to last for 18 months at a time. So it has to resist mold, it has to resist spoiling and those kinds of things. So it has to be crafted a little bit differently. And the astronauts don't eat the same thing. Each astronaut has a specific diet and specific meal plan, especially for their body and their design and their needs, if that makes sense. So they have everything you can think of. They have pizza, they have cookies. They just tried baking cookies on the space station. They had we piloted this little oven. It was kind of an epic fail, but yeah, it was still
there. Until you try, right?
That's right. And we have the ability, and we are doing this now currently, we actually have the ability to grow vegetables in space. So we have done some green leafy things. We're trying peppers and tomatoes this year. And of course, those spoil pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So, and we do allow the astronauts to eat them, but most of those are returned to Earth so that we can study them. And understanding that, and the reason why, and this, I could talk about this all day, but the reason why it's so important to like grow food, like why would you do that, is because one, to see if we can, and to see if you can have sustained life on Earth in its own, on the moon or in some other environment, in its own environment. And the other reason is for psychological health. Astronauts are isolated, they're away from their families, they have none of the comforts of home, and being able to just crunch into a piece of lettuce or have the taste and the texture, the juicy, wet texture of like a tomato on their tongue, it does wonders for them. So the primary benefit right now of why we're growing food in space is just for their psychological health.
That makes so much sense, and I never thought about it, and now I'm like tearing up thinking about those guys out there just being, homesick and just wanting some lettuce or tomatoes. That's so
And one of our astronauts we call Papa Wheels, he tells this great story about, he was asked what his favorite food was. And of all the things he said, it was split pea soup. And it came in this like little bottle that you had to suck it through, and like split pea soup, like of all the things you could pick. And the reason why he loved it was because it tasted like his grandma's. And it reminded him, it was his connection with home. And so that was his favorite food.
I love that. What a great story.
Yeah.
All right, couple more space-related questions. Laura's daughter, Eva, wants to know, and this probably varies by person, but in your opinion, what do you think would be the most exciting thing about being in space, and then also the scariest?
So for me, just in how I interact with the astronauts, and we do a lot of interacting with the astronauts aboard ISS and kind of go through their experience with them. So I'm kind of cheating on this because I'm not like really, I'm not really guessing, but one is just the view of Earth from space. That would be the most exciting thing to see. And we have this thing that's called the overview effect, and it's astronauts give their view of how their worldview changes after they return from Earth and what's so different and how it just changes them. And the scariest thing, again, I'm cheating, is it's a really interesting thing when astronauts have to do spacewalks from the International Space Station, like to repair something or do something. When they get when they're coming down out of the spacecraft, there's microgravity. So there's very, very little gravity, and they're floating and all that stuff. So their interaction with the aircraft and with the air and with the environment around them is very different than our interaction. And the biggest thing is trusting themselves to let go. You have to actually let go, because you feel like naturally you're going to fall. There's nothing beneath you. There's that big scary feeling. And so to actually let go for the first time, and when they're letting go, you can't grab, you can't do anything sudden, you can't do anything hard, you can't do anything forcefully, because it isn't just like us here on Earth. So they don't grab on as they're moving around, they just touch it with their fingertips. Everything has to be light, so they don't give too much force, too much push. They have to be just very aware and very present in how they touch, what they're doing, how they use things, how hard they're tightening something or pulling on something. You can't just fling it. And another really interesting thing about living aboard the space station or in space is I had a colleague that likened it to living in a third world country. The things that we take for granted, like being able to just use the restroom and cleanliness issues and washing our hair whenever we want to and things like that, they don't have. And think about that. Think about living in space or being in space. For Christina Cook just came back. She was there for almost a year without taking a whole shower or without feeling running water. Or without being able to cook a hot meal, or and just thinking about, and we can really get into some stuff, but thinking about like how they use the restroom is just very different than how we do it. And we don't think about it, we just go, or, we don't have to strap ourselves in to go to sleep at night. We don't have to, it's very different. And so I don't think people appreciate, that's one of the things I wish people could do, is appreciate what the astronauts actually go through up there. It looks so cool, it looks so amazing, and it is, but they give up so much, and it's just a very difficult life while they're there.
And that brings like the full circle back to the food, right? They're giving up all of these things and all of these comforts. So if we can at least give them lettuce or split pea soup, then that might, yeah, I totally get that.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, we've got, we have a couple more questions from Eva. Eva, we're going to answer one more right now, and then we'll get back to the presentation, but we'll come back. Eva's last question for right now is, will there be 3D printers on board so astronauts can print the stuff that they need out there?
Yes, absolutely. We have them on board now on the International Space Station. We test it. That's one of the things that makes going to space sustainable, because we have resupply missions, but if we can lower that, or if we can, we're all about reusing. And so everything that the astronauts use is, well, almost everything that they use, they do, all their bodily fluids, everything you can think about is recyclable and is reusable. And so they can, if we can take something that's packaged some way, take that material, put it in a 3D printer and print what we need, it just makes life so much better. So we're working to get better at it and to have more, and so that so they don't take up so much space and, storage, and there's all kinds of things. But yes, that's a great question. And it's one of the things that makes what we're doing sustainable and repeatable.
That's fantastic. Thank you for taking this little segue. Lots of fun questions. We do have some more, but I think we'll go back to your presentation and then we can come back to those later.
Sure. Okay. This is fun. Okay. And so we're going to right now get into the different phases of Artemis. So Artemis 1 is our first mission, which should happen the end of this year or early next year. And it's uncrewed. It's a test. It's designed to test the SLS rocket and the Orion crew to make sure that both can withstand the rigors of spaceflight and keep the crew safe. This next video kind of explains, it'll kind of show you what kind of happens, but human safety is one of the most important concerns. And if you're looking at that rocket, pretty much the entire orange cylinder is all rocket fuel. So imagine that. That is so much rocket fuel that our astronauts are having to sit on. And it takes that much power and propulsion to get it into Earth. And so we want to make sure that both the Orion crew capsule and SLS function properly before we put crew on board.
Chief Safety Officer by demonstration.
Five, four, three, two, one. Booster ignition and liftoff.
So Artemis 1, just to recap, is just the first test mission. It's completely uncrewed of the SLS rocket and the Orion spacecraft, and they're doing, for lack of a better term, laps around the moon, just to see how the spacecraft reacts and understand if there's any point there. They're monitoring everything you can think of and imagine inside the crew capsule, where the crew would be and how it would affect their bodies, to how the space, both the rocket and Orion are reacting to the different environments that in space and all of that stuff before we put the crew on. Artemis 2 is the first flight with crew and will go to the vicinity of the moon. So this is a test mission. And even though it's a test mission, astronauts will go farther into the solar system than any human has ever traveled before. Their mission will be to confirm all of the spacecraft systems operate as designed in the actual environment of deep space with crew aboard. This first mission with crew will be a big step forward in our efforts to return humans to the moon for long-term exploration and future missions to Mars. So Artemis 2 is super important. It's with the crew, but again, we're not landing on the moon or staying. It's just checking, testing all of the systems and communications and delays and how everything kind of interacts and reacts. Artemis 3 is the first flight with crew and will go to the moon. It will land astronauts on the moon by 2024, and it'll use SLS and Orion. And the crew is going to spend up to 6.5 days on the lunar surface. And from this point, we will start going to the moon at least once every year. And the vehicle that you're seeing in front of you, that is the lander that actually lands on the moon, where the astronauts can actually get out and actually do their experiments on the moon. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So Gateway. Gateway is really cool. Gateway is crucial to supporting missions in orbit and on the lunar surface. So it's going to be a permanent spaceship that will orbit the moon continuously. So it doesn't land. It's like, for lack of a better term, they're very different, but it's like ISS. It just stays up there. It's kind of like a temporary home, like a hotel, an office, a refueling station, supply storage, and a lunar laboratory for the astronauts, where they can stay for up to 3 months at a time. And cargo deliveries will be scheduled when the crew isn't present. So Gateway is kind of like a workstation. So when we're not landing, we can go, the astronauts can stay for longer periods of time. They can land on the moon. The lander can return them to Gateway. They can live in Gateway and do their laboratory experiments and send things back to Earth and that kind of thing. So it allows them to stay longer, work longer, but still have, and still be in close proximity to Earth. The human landing system is the final mode of transportation for deep space exploration. And it actually carries humans to the surface of the moon. On the earlier missions, astronauts will live inside the pressurized crew cabin portion of the lander for up to a week. So they can actually go in and out, live inside the little gold portion, and stay on the moon and have everything that they need. So the landing system is still in development. Everything is. We're still kind of designing it. And the first landing system will not be reusable as so far. And that's kind of not what we want, but it'll work. It'll stay on the moon. And so they can use it as storage and we can repurpose it for other things. So before we return humans to the moon, we're going to send a bunch of science experiments and technology demonstrations to the lunar surface on commercial landers. So there will already be stuff on the moon waiting for the astronauts once they get there. And when we do get there, what we want the astronauts to do is to find and use water and other resources that we would need for long-term exploration, investigate the moon's mysteries and learn more about Earth from the moon perspective, and then learn how to live and operate outside of our planet. And then we're going to also test out technologies that we need before sending astronauts on missions to Mars, which can take up to a round trip from Earth to Mars and back can take up to 3 years. And I can pause there to see if we have questions.
Questions about this? So, perfect. All right, so Allison wants to know what happens to the pieces that fall off of Orion?
Great question, great question. Most of them burn up in the atmosphere. Some of them can return to in the ocean. The ocean will fall into the ocean, but most of them burn up in the atmosphere.
Okay, perfect.
Good question.
Eva wants to know, will there be any side missions like in a video game? You have your main mission, but then you have these little side things that you do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's a kind of a hard one to answer. So the answer is yes, but we all bundle it up in Artemis. So everything is a side mission. We have millions of side missions going on all of the time, kind of simultaneously. So while we're testing out the vehicle and the crew and this and that, we're also testing out food. We're testing out psychological things. We're testing out, they have experiments like on the International Space Station. One of the things the astronauts agree to are to become human experiments. We do bone density. They take their blood. They sample all kinds of things. So there are hundreds of like little side missions to determine other things. And there are other goals, like can we colonize the moon? Can people actually vacation on the moon? What would it take for a non-astronaut to visit the moon? Could they survive? Could they, without the training, without the psychological training and the things that astronauts go through for years, could we survive? Could we make it? Would we like freak out? Because it is very different. So that's a great question. There's hundreds of side missions, I think, in everything NASA does. It's just, we're very strategic that way. So I hope that answers your question. So yes, but we're bundling it all up under Artemis.
Sure. I think I would freak out personally, but that's just me. Right, one last question from Mia before we move on. She wants to know if anyone has ever written their name in moon dust.
So not technically in that sense. Well, to be honest, we don't know. They could have. And we just didn't record it. But we do have footprints. We do have things that have been left behind commemorating the occasion. And the cool thing about the moon that we're learning now is there's very little gravity, very little atmosphere, so things stay. So when astronauts travel back to the moon, they will be able to see Neil Armstrong's footprints. They can see asteroids that hit the moon hundreds of years ago. The impacts and the way the moon looks, it just stays. It's like this human capsule. It's like this capsule that captures everything that's happened since it was created in form. So that's a really cool and very kind of interesting fact about the moon.
Very cool. All right, sorry, we had one more come up. Monica has asked if the astronauts have any downtime on the moon to relax and not be doing something.
So yeah, Sure, kind of. So they do have moments where most of our astronauts have really gotten into photography, and they really have, and they use the same internet that we do. So they can keep up with their Instagram accounts, and they send us photos that we post and things like that constantly. So a lot of things that you're seeing, if you follow us on social media, our ISS account or NASA Explorers or NASA or anything, there's almost 100 NASA accounts. But if you follow us, the things that they're posting are pretty much real time. So they kind of do that, and they have little segments of time where they have pizza parties or do little things, but there's not much downtime because there's just a small window of time that they're there, and we want to do as much as we can kind of while we're there. So it's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So
we don't abuse them,
right?
But it is a huge sacrifice.
Sure. Perfect. All right. Well, we can head back to your presentation. We did have some more questions come in, but we will get to those. So everyone just be a little patient with us.
Perfect. The questions are great, by the way.
Good.
Okay, from here we'll talk about spacesuits. One of my favorite things. I just love, we have a spacesuit. I get to work with a spacesuit engineer. She designs spacesuits, and it's like super cool. So there's kind of two spacesuits. When astronauts are aboard the Orion spacecraft, so that's when they're leaving Earth's atmosphere and re-entering. That's when they're in Orion. They'll wear Orion crew survival suits. And then when they get to the lunar surface, they'll wear Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Unit suits, or XEMUs, to explore the moon's south pole for the first time. We have these new suits. They're more comfortable. They accommodate a broad range of sizes. And most importantly, they provide for more mobility. So the first spacesuits, they didn't have like elbow joints. They couldn't bend at the torso, so bending at the waist was very difficult. They didn't have knee joints. So these next suits will be a little bit more flexible and allow the astronauts an easier opportunity to do their job. And we have a quick little video kind of explaining both of the suits. And one really cool thing, or a couple cool things I want to say about the suits are, one, they are customized. So each astronaut has a suit that's customized for themselves. So they're not interchangeable. So say, for example, someone can't go to the moon. We can't just like reuse their suit. Their suit has to be kind of redesigned, and it has to be specifically fit for the person, because you have to remember that spacesuits are actually mini spaceships, and they have all of the life sustaining properties of the spaceship inside the suits, including heating and air conditioning and cooling systems and oxygen. And they also do really cool things like measure heartbeat, measure like liver functions and things like that to ensure the astronaut safety. So the suits are like super, super cool, but it is important because we had a mission probably, I think last year, where astronauts were swapping out, and not one wasn't going to ISS, and we were bringing another one on. And so we had to kind of delay the flight for that reason, but people didn't understand why. Just give her the other suit. Just there's random suits, just put another one on. And it just doesn't work like that. Each suit is customized for each individual astronaut to ensure that their health and safety and that we can monitor them. So the next thing we're going to talk about really quickly are what we call bots before boots. So robots are already living and working on Mars. And I know you've probably heard of our Mars rovers, and we're planning Mars Perseverance is, we've got a launch plan for August. And they paved the way for humans to explore. They analyze the environment for water and key resources. They're analyzing dust, radiation, and toxicity. And this is super important for humans to be able to survive on the moon. Temperature changes, the temperature sways drastically. So you can't just land anywhere on the moon or anywhere on Mars. So like the moon, the lunar South Pole, the Shackleton crater, it has been researched and researched and researched and researched, and it's the best place to sustain life. And that it's not in direct sunlight, it's not a permanently shadowed region. The temperatures are so drastically different. In the sunlight, it can reach temperatures of hundreds of degrees and then go down to hundreds of degrees below zero in shadow regions. So being able to understand what the regions are, what the temperatures are, measure how often sunlight comes, and how many days there are of sunlight and how many days there are of shadow or shade, things like that. There's also weather on Mars, and the robots are also kind of testing for things that would affect crew health and looking for life-sustaining resources such as water, of course. The robots or our rovers, they also help us test our ability to safely arrive, orbit, and land. These rovers, most of the rovers are the size of anywhere from the size of a car to like an 18-wheeler truck. And so thinking about landing that on the moon, you can't just drop it down. And so being able to do a gentle, soft landing, and we've destroyed many a vehicle just trying to land it. So trying to understand that is very difficult. They improve and characterizing what landing site would be best. And then also life supported technology. They test technologies, and one of the biggest things they do is communicate with Earth, and they're working to reduce delays. So like I said before, communicating from Mars to Earth, right now we know there's a 24-minute delay just in the signal. And so what can we do to reduce those delays? What can we do to work around it? How can we improve capabilities? And so what do we need to ensure that if there is a long communication delay or some sort of blackout or some sort of anomaly that happens within space that we don't know anything about, could astronauts on their own be able to get back and to get to safety and remain safe? All right, so we're going to kind of transition here a little bit. That's kind of an overview of Artemis. We're going to transition into talking just real quickly about STEM careers, one of my favorite topics to talk about, and working at NASA. These are a couple of careers that we have. But at NASA, one of the most interesting things about working here is you can have almost any background, any career field, any interest, any gift, any talent, and it's usable. We have scientists, engineers, IT specialists, human resource specialists, accountants, writers, technicians, lawyers. We have all kinds of people that work together to make the mission happen. And one of the things I want to stress is you can partner what you're interested in with space if that's something that you want to do. For example, I myself, prior to working at NASA and becoming a writer, well, prior to becoming a full-time writer, I was a teacher. And so that's just a very different background, but NASA needs everyone. And so understanding that if you don't have to necessarily be really good at math or really good at science or really into engineering or technology. We need all kinds of people, archaeologists, architects, geologists, chefs, artists, designers, and that's why I love working at NASA, because I love art. I'm more of a creative than I am a scientist. I do lots of research and things like that, but my natural inclination is I draw really well. I love graphic design. I love writing, creative writing, all kinds of things like that. And there's a place for all of it kind of within NASA. So I would suggest that you just stay focused. And if you want to do something, understand that life doesn't move in a straight line. Your process is probably not going to be linear. So the ultimate goal, if your ultimate goal is to work at NASA, that is very doable, but being able to do it like straight out of college is very, very, very difficult to do. And so understanding and being flexible that you might have to take a different path, you might have to do this over here, and understand that all roads will lead to your goal if you just use it. As long as you're moving toward it, even though it's a little sideways or if it's a little off, you kind of bird walking, zigzagging, as long as you keep your goal in focus and be open to new experiences, you will always be successful. And I'll pause right there. Are there any questions on STEM or anything else I've said so far?
Yes, we do have a few more questions for you. Okay, so let's see. Lee has asked if man-made debris in orbit poses a real risk to the craft and or to the mission team while they're outside the craft.
No, not so. It's a really good question. So I guess it could, but no, it doesn't. Everything is monitored so closely. They know where everything is. They know how to jettison things. There is space debris. That's a thing. But the environment is so closely monitored because that kind of stuff, like for example, ISS, that kind of stuff could compromise the space station. So being able to monitor the environment, that's huge. So always monitoring the environment, always knowing where things are, and then knowing how, because we know what debris we're going to leave. It's not like accidental. It's not like I just opened a candy bar and, oh, there's a wrapper. We already know exactly what the debris is going to be, how long it's going to last, how it will interact, how it's going to move in orbit and things like that. So it could, but we plan for it. So some things you can't eliminate, and we can't quite yet eliminate all debris, but we can plan for it and work around it. It's a great question.
That makes a lot of sense. So Eva has a couple of questions about Mars. She asked these earlier in the presentation, but I was waiting towards the end because I knew we were talking a lot about the moon. But she wants to know if you personally would like to live on Mars.
At this time, knowing what I know, no, I'm interested. I think, there's a very real possibility, much, 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 much further down the road. I don't like to be the first to do a whole lot of things that are experimental. Like when you get the first iPhone or there's so many things we don't know. And so there are things that we haven't figured out. And then I think being on Earth and our interaction that we have here, I think I enjoy that. I enjoy the personal people experience kind of more than I would just kind of living on Mars with like 6 other people. So at this moment, my answer would have to be no.
Fair enough. I think a lot of people would be in agreement with you on that.
I think it's cool though.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. She also asked what you thought about The Martian, the movie. Did you see it?
Yes. Really good movie. The movie makers actually worked with NASA, so it's accurate-ish. There are a lot of parts that were somewhat accurate, but it is entertainment. So understanding that the purpose is to entertain, not necessarily educate. So I think but it does give you a perspective on what it would be like to live in space, and a perspective of what it's kind of like up there. It's a little bit different. You don't get to walk around and, build your own. It's not as spacious as that. It wouldn't be like that, but it is. I thought psychologically, some of how Matt Damon was like kind of psychologically, I think that was very accurate and very real. I did love that. I'm not one of those like people that can't enjoy a good movie because it's inaccurate. Some of the inaccuracies bother you, but we overlook those and keep it moving.
Well, like you said, sometimes it's for entertainment and not necessarily education.
Yeah.
Perfect. So talking about STEM careers, I know you talked a little bit about how like any field can really get you there, but Isabella would like to know what sort of advice you might have for her on how she can become an astronaut.
So becoming an astronaut. So most of our astronauts in times past, they were usually military, they were usually pilots, they were usually something of that sort. Today, that's not necessarily true, but you have to have all of those skills. So we have some that are doctors by profession, because that is very needed in space and in these, understanding the human body. So you would have to have a very advanced degree in whatever, in engineering, in some sort of science, understanding flight, how to fly, understanding systems and how systems work. So it would be probably science or engineering career, most likely. And even though we are opening it up, well, we used to didn't do medical doctors and things like that, we understand the need. And so they look for a specific type. So even though it's a medical doctor, you have to have kind of an inclination or a bent to understanding engineering, to be able to fly a plane, to understand abort systems, and then there's a personality profile that they kind of look for. You have to be cool, calm, and collected. I don't know if you've ever listened to Mission Control or anything like that. They never get excited. During launch, it is the most chill, calm, super cool environment you could ever be in, even when we have to abort, even when there's a huge problem. We don't do anything to agitate the astronauts, and they are the same. So it's kind of we have a lot on that. If you Google how to be an astronaut, we have put out so many resources, and I've even done some for kids. If you're looking to be an astronaut, kind of what it takes, it's a tight career. It's really hard to get selected. In our last round of astronaut applications, we had 18,000, and I think something like 12, a class of 12 or 24 were selected. And that's just to get into the program to begin training. So there's quite you do have to, the degrees that they accept now are very open, but understanding if you like engineering, if you like how things work, flying planes, piloting, things like that, good at science, good at math, that kind of thing, then astronaut is probably more where you would be a career field for you.
That's perfect. Thank you. So Lee has popped in and he has asked, how much, if any, impact does international policies have on U.S. trips to the ISS and or future trips to the lunar surface?
Oh, this is an adult question.
Feel free to answer how you see fit.
So of course they do. But the cool thing about that I learned probably my first couple weeks working at NASA and working with our international community is it's kind of a separate community within the community. So a lot of things that you see happening in politics wide are not happening or impacting the international community for space. It's very, we work really well together. We try to be inclusive. And some of the, I don't get in trouble here, but some of the rhetoric you hear, kind of in the news and on politics, really, it's just noise. It's just noise. It's not really affecting or how, at the core, people feel. We work really well with ESA, that's the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency. All of them are a part. Going to the moon and the things that we do is an international effort. ISS was built by, I want to say, 18 countries. We have flown up until Launch America, which was just recently. We fly on Russian aircraft to get to the International Space Station. It's a very cooperative community. And of course, policies do somewhat affect it, but not on the level that you would think, and not as broad or as big as it does like out here with all of the news happening and all this stuff. It's not quite like that.
I think that's great news. So that's nice to hear.
It's a very cooperative environment. And we, at NASA, one of the things we talk about a lot is if we could get people to see the way that relationship really is, and how we have international partnerships and how we have all signs like Space Act agreements and agreements not to do certain things, and no countries have violated those agreements. And we operate for the most part peacefully together. There's very little back and forth. It's pretty amazing when you think about all the world wars and all the things we've been through since our space programs kind of evolved, and how we've been able to keep it out of the space program and still keep the same partners. It's pretty amazing.
That's great.
Gives me hope.
Yes. I think a lot of us watching would agree with that. So. Well, I really want to respect your time. We don't have any more questions coming in. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day, out of your busy schedule to chat with all of us. I know I've enjoyed it. I think everyone who's watched has enjoyed it. Do you have any final last minute farewell words for us?
No, I would just say thank you so much for having me. I love doing this. You guys are amazing. And the reason why I do this, I guess, is because I've never wanted to work at NASA. That's never been on my radar. It's never been a goal of mine because I had never been exposed to it. And so one of the things that I want to do is to make sure that you're exposed and know that this is an option, and it's a very real option. If I can do it, if I can work here, you can too. But for some of us, it's just never been on our radar. And understanding how open it is, and you can do anything, you just kind of have to broaden your horizons and explore and think about things you would never think about, and look into things that you wouldn't really, because it's so far removed from us. And I didn't live in a town where space was a thing. I didn't live near a NASA center or those kinds of things. And I just, so exposure is everything. And so I would encourage everybody listening to expose yourself to as many things as you can, and to be open, to always have goals, but to be flexible and to be open to explore.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. We hope to maybe chat with you again soon. We'll see.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye.